My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm recording this from my apartment in Portland, Oregon on a Tuesday night because I need you to understand something that's been burning inside my chest for 3 years. Friday nights used to mean something different in my life. They used to mean escape, relief, the moment when my 7-year-old daughter Emma would come through my door with stories about her week, her eyes bright with that kind of innocent joy that makes you believe the world is actually good. But one particular Friday night in April, everything changed, and the person I'm about to tell you about, the man I once loved more than life itself, forced me into a position where I had to choose between protecting my daughter and losing her completely. Before I dive into this story, I need to say something that's been eating at me. My mother told me I'd never reach 1,000 subscribers on this channel, that nobody would care about stories like mine, that I'd just be another voice screaming into the void. But I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. I believe that what happened to my daughter matters. I believe that if even one person watches this and recognizes their own situation, their own fear, their own desperation to protect someone they love, then everything I'm about to share becomes worth it. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe to Olive Revenge Stories, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now, let's continue. The rain started falling around 3 o'clock that afternoon, fat droplets that seemed angry against the windshield of my Honda Civic as I drove toward my ex-husband's house in Seattle's Ballard neighborhood. I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual, my knuckles white against the black leather, because I always got anxious on pickup days. Not because of Marcus, my ex, though God knows he'd given me plenty of reasons to be anxious over the years. No, my anxiety came from something deeper, something I couldn't quite name, but could absolutely feel in my stomach like a stone that refused to dissolve. It was the kind of intuition that mothers develop, that sixth sense that tells you something is wrong before your rational mind can catch up. Emma was waiting for me on the porch when I pulled up, standing under the covered overhang in her bright yellow raincoat, looking smaller than she had just 5 days ago when I dropped her off. 5 days. Monday through Friday. 96 hours away from my child, and she looked like she'd aged a year. Her mother, Jennifer, my ex-husband's new girlfriend, stood behind her in the doorway, arms crossed, a smile on her face that didn't reach her eyes. I should have known something was terribly wrong by the way Emma practically threw herself into my arms before I'd even fully opened the car door. She didn't say hello. She didn't tell me about the movie they'd watched or the ice cream they'd had. She just clung to me, her small arms wrapped around my neck so tightly I could barely breathe, and I felt something shift in my chest, like a fault line opening up beneath my entire understanding of what was happening in that house. As I drove away from the curb, with the rain intensifying and the wipers struggling to keep up with the downpour, Emma remained silent. This was unusual. Emma was a talker, a 7-year-old girl who could describe in excruciating detail the exact shade of purple a flower had been, who would narrate her own breakfast like she was hosting a cooking show. But this Emma, this version of my daughter sitting in the back seat in her booster seat, was a ghost of herself. About 15 minutes into the drive, just as we were crossing the I-90 bridge toward Mercer Island, Emma's voice came from the back seat, small and fractured and barely audible over the sound of the rain. She said, "Mommy, did Daddy tell you?" And something in her voice, some subtle note of fear and shame and confusion, made my hands start shaking so badly that I had to pull over. We were parked on the side of the bridge, rain hammering the car like it wanted to crush us, and I turned to look at my daughter, really look at her, and that's when I saw it. There was bruising on her arms, faint but unmistakable, the kind of marks that looked like small fingerprints. My heart stopped. No, that's not accurate. My heart didn't stop. It accelerated to a pace that felt like it would explode, and my vision tunneled until all I could see was my daughter's frightened face. I asked her what happened, and she told me. Slowly, hesitantly, with long pauses where she looked down at her hands, Emma described how Jennifer had gotten angry because she'd spilled juice on the kitchen counter. It wasn't a big spill. It was nothing, really, the kind of accident that happens 1,000 times a day in households across America. But Jennifer had grabbed her arm hard and shaken her and told her she was stupid and clumsy and that she was ruining everything for their family. Emma had been confused because she didn't understand how she was ruining anything. She'd just been trying to help clean up, and Jennifer had yelled at her for trying to clean up the spill. The contradictions in the instructions, the shifting goalposts, the punishment for trying to do the right thing, all of it created a psychological chaos in my 7-year-old daughter that had manifested as absolute fear and shutdown. But there was more. And I knew there was more because I could see it in the way Emma was still holding back, still looking like there was something bigger, something worse, something that she was terrified to tell me. I pulled back onto the road, my mind racing through legal options, safety protocols, everything I'd ever heard about child protective services and custody battles. We drove in silence for 10 more minutes before Emma finally spoke again. She said that Jennifer had made her call me. This alone should have been a red flag. Why would Jennifer make Emma call me? But I didn't understand the full picture yet. Emma had called me on Wednesday afternoon, and Jennifer had stood right there in the room, watching her, listening to every word. Jennifer had made Emma tell me that she was so happy and that Jennifer was so nice and that everything was perfect at the house. But while Jennifer was standing there, she had pinched Emma's side so hard that Emma had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. The pinching was a reminder. Say the right things, or there would be consequences. This is when I made the decision that would change everything. I pulled into a parking lot near Bellevue Square Mall, put the car in park, and I made a phone call. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold the phone to my ear. The call went to voicemail. It always went to voicemail when I really needed it to be answered, and I left a message that was professional but firm. I told Marcus that we needed to talk, that there had been an incident at his house, and that I was considering whether Emma would be spending time there in the future until we could sort out what was happening. I didn't mention the bruising. I didn't mention the pinching. I didn't mention the psychological manipulation. I was being careful because I knew that one misstep, one word that sounded too accusatory, too emotional, could backfire spectacularly in family court. But inside, I was screaming. Inside, every fiber of my being wanted to drive straight to that house, march inside, and tell Jennifer exactly what I thought of her. Instead, I sat in a parking lot in Bellevue, Washington, trying to keep my hands steady enough to drive, trying to keep my voice calm enough to be credible, trying to figure out how to protect my daughter in a system that seemed designed to protect everyone except the children who needed it most. The next 24 hours were a blur of phone calls, research, and documentation. I took photos of the bruising on Emma's arms, though the marks were already fading, already becoming less visible, which meant there was a time limit on the evidence. I wrote down everything Emma told me, every detail, every date, every incident. I called my lawyer, Patricia Chen, who works out of a modest office in downtown Seattle and who has been my advocate through every custody dispute and disagreement with Marcus. Patricia told me what I already knew but didn't want to hear. I needed to be very careful not to appear to be coaching Emma or trying to turn her against her father. At the same time, I had a responsibility to report suspected child abuse to Child Protective Services. The balance between these two imperatives, protecting my child while not appearing to be weaponizing her against her father, felt impossible. But Patricia was good. She's the kind of lawyer who doesn't just tell you what the law says. She tells you what judges actually think, what will play in a courtroom, what will make your case stronger or weaker based on how you present it. She told me to call Washington's Department of Child and Family Services and make a report. She told me to be factual, to stick to what Emma had directly told me, and to let the professionals do their job. What Patricia didn't tell me, because she probably didn't know, was that making a report would feel like a betrayal. I know that sounds strange. I know that protecting my child is the opposite of a betrayal. But Marcus was still my daughter's father. Despite everything, despite the infidelity that had ended our marriage, despite his poor judgment in choosing Jennifer, he was still the man who had taught Emma to ride a bike, who sang her lullabies in a voice so off-key that she would giggle, who loved her in his own way. And by making this report, I was officially setting in motion a process that could result in him losing custody, in CPS investigating his parenting, in a custody battle that could last for months or even years. I was terrified that I was overreacting. I was terrified that I was underreacting. I was terrified of everything. But on Saturday morning, I made the call to the Department of Child and Family Services, and I reported suspected child abuse. The person on the other end of the line was professional and calm, asking me specific questions about the nature of the abuse, the timing, whether Emma had any injuries, whether there had been any threats. I answered every question carefully, trying to sound credible but not hysterical, trying to present the facts while my entire body was vibrating with adrenaline and fear. The investigator assigned to our case was a woman named Detective Maria Santos, and she called me on Tuesday afternoon. Her voice was warm but businesslike, and she explained that she would be interviewing both Marcus and Jennifer, as well as conducting an independent evaluation of Emma. What she didn't tell me was that Marcus would immediately call me, furious, telling me that I'd crossed a line, that I was poisoning Emma against him, that I was using the system as a weapon in our custody dispute. The conversation lasted 45 minutes, and it was the hardest conversation I've ever had. Marcus wasn't wrong to be angry. I had, technically, caused the state to open an investigation into his parenting. But he was wrong about my motivation. I wasn't trying to poison Emma. I was trying to keep her safe. And yet, hearing the accusation come out of his mouth, hearing the betrayal in his voice, made me question everything. What if Jennifer had just been having a bad day? What if Emma was exaggerating? What if I was destroying my family over nothing? But then I looked at my daughter, who was sitting on my couch watching a movie, trying to seem normal, trying to seem fine, and I remembered those bruises. I remembered the way she had clung to me in the car. I remembered her telling me about the pinching, her voice so small, so defeated, so certain that what was happening to her was somehow her fault. And I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right choice, even though it felt like the most betraying choice I could possibly make. The investigation took 8 weeks. 8 weeks of Emma going to her appointments with the child psychologist that CPS appointed. 8 weeks of Detective Maria Santos interviewing people at Emma's school, talking to her teachers, looking for patterns of behavior that might indicate abuse. 8 weeks of Marcus and Jennifer making my life difficult in every way they could think of. They contested my custody schedule. They demanded that Emma's therapy visits be suspended, claiming I was coaching her. They filed a complaint against me with the state, suggesting that I was the one who was abusive, that I was using Emma as a pawn in our divorce. It was psychological warfare disguised as legal procedure. And through it all, I had to maintain my composure, had to present myself as a reasonable, responsible parent, had to prove that I was the stable one, the safe one, the one who had Emma's best interests at heart. The stress of it all manifested in physical ways. I lost 12 pounds without trying. I developed tension headaches that lasted for days. I couldn't sleep, even when Emma was safe and sleeping beside me. Every time my phone rang, I thought it was bad news. Every time I received an email, I braced myself for another accusation, another challenge, another attempt to undermine my credibility. But then, in week 9, something shifted. The child psychologist filed her report with CPS, and in that report, she documented that Emma had consistent and credible accounts of physical discipline that crossed the line into physical abuse. The report noted that Emma had described specific incidents with specific details, that her story remained consistent across multiple interviews, and that her emotional presentation was consistent with a child who had experienced trauma. The report also noted that Emma did not demonstrate signs of being coached or manipulated. Instead, she demonstrated signs of genuine distress and confusion about why she was being punished. And then the investigator filed her own report. Detective Maria Santos had interviewed the neighbors, who reported hearing Jennifer yelling at Emma on multiple occasions. She had interviewed Emma's second-grade teacher, Mrs. Angela Rodriguez, who noted that Emma had come to school with a long-sleeved shirt in July and had seemed withdrawn and anxious, unusual for a child who had previously been social and engaged. She had examined the physical evidence, though by then the bruising had faded. But she had also found something else, a text message exchange between Marcus and Jennifer from the week after Emma had disclosed the abuse, in which Jennifer had written, "Did she tell you what happened with the juice? Because I can explain that. She's so dramatic sometimes." It was barely a pinch. The word barely was doing a lot of work in that sentence. It was the word of someone who knew that what they had done was wrong, who was trying to minimize it, who was hoping that it could be explained away as nothing. And that text message became the turning point in the investigation. On a Thursday afternoon in July, I received a call from Detective Maria Santos. She told me that the investigation had concluded and that her findings supported my report. Jennifer had engaged in physical discipline that was excessive and inappropriate. There were substantiated findings of child abuse. The case would be referred to the prosecutor's office for potential criminal charges, though she warned me that the prosecutor might decline to pursue charges given the difficulty of proving intent and the relative mildness of the physical injuries. But what mattered more to me than criminal charges was what came next. The Department of Child and Family Services recommended that Emma's custody be modified to reflect concerns about her safety in Marcus's household. This recommendation would carry significant weight in family court. I hung up the phone and cried, not tears of joy, but tears of something more complicated. I was relieved that someone else, someone official, someone with authority, believed my daughter. I was devastated that my ex-husband's judgment had been so poor that he had allowed someone abusive into my daughter's life. I was terrified of what came next. What came next was the custody battle that I had been dreading since the moment I made that phone call to CPS. Marcus hired a more aggressive lawyer, a man named David Burke who specialized in family law and who seemed to believe that any accusation against my ex-husband was basically an accusation against my ex-husband. The strategy was clear. Make me out to be the unstable one, the one who was weaponizing our daughter, the one who couldn't handle sharing custody, so she was making up stories to get more control. It's a strategy that works shockingly well because it plays into existing gender biases about mothers being overly protective and vindictive. There were depositions. There were arguments about whether Emma should be involved in the court proceedings or whether she should be spared the trauma. There was a custody evaluation by a court-appointed psychologist, Dr. Robertson, who spent hours with both Marcus and me, who interviewed Emma, who reviewed all the evidence. And through it all, I had to be the most normal version of myself, the most stable, the most reasonable. I couldn't cry in public. I couldn't express my anger at Marcus. I couldn't do anything that would give his lawyer ammunition to suggest that I was unstable or vindictive. The worst part was Marcus's response to the whole situation. Instead of taking responsibility, instead of accepting that he had made a bad choice in Jennifer, he doubled down. He told me that I was a liar. He told me that Emma was confused, that children don't remember things accurately, that she had probably misinterpreted Jennifer's discipline. He offered to continue as normal, to suggest that Emma still spend 3 days a week at his house, with Jennifer present, as if nothing had happened. When I refused, he told his family that I was keeping his daughter away from him out of spite. And his family, who had never particularly liked me anyway, believed him. There were emails from his sister telling me what a terrible person I was. There were Facebook posts from his mother, which she eventually deleted, but not before screenshots were taken, suggesting that I was a vindictive ex-wife destroying a family. The public humiliation was almost as difficult as the legal battle itself, because I couldn't respond. I couldn't defend myself publicly without appearing petty and vindictive. So I stayed silent, and the silence felt like agreement, like an admission of guilt. 8 months after I made that first phone call to CPS, the judge issued her ruling. Judge Patricia Washington, a woman with silver hair and an expression that suggested she had seen the absolute worst of human nature and was no longer impressed by it, made a decision that reflected the findings of the CPS investigation and the child psychologist's report. Emma's primary custody remained with me, but the visitation schedule with Marcus was modified. He would have supervised visitation only, meaning that either I or a court-appointed supervisor would be present during his time with Emma. Jennifer was not permitted to be present during visitation. Additionally, if Marcus wanted unsupervised visitation with Emma to resume, he would have to complete parenting classes and attend therapy to address why he had allowed someone abusive into Emma's life. The judge's voice, when she read the order, was clinical and professional, but her eyes, when she looked at Marcus, were filled with something that looked like contempt. She said, "Mr. Mitchell, you have a responsibility to protect your daughter. That responsibility supersedes your romantic relationships. You have failed in that responsibility. This court hopes that this decision will help you understand the gravity of that failure and motivate you to make different choices in the future. When I heard those words, I felt something settle inside me. Not happiness, exactly, but something like validation. Someone official, someone who had no stake in my family's drama, had looked at the evidence and decided that I had been right to make that phone call. Emma had been right to tell me what was happening. The system, for once, had worked. But I was also aware that this was not a happy ending. This was a beginning. Emma would still need therapy. Emma would still have to navigate a relationship with her father that was now mediated and supervised. I would still have to co-parent with someone I no longer trusted for the next 11 years until Emma turned 18. The trauma didn't just disappear because a judge issued an order. If anything, it was just beginning. The first supervised visit was awkward and painful. Marcus sat across from me in my living room, and I sat across the room, and Emma sat between us, physically representing the distance that had formed in our family. Marcus tried to be cheerful, asking Emma about school and her activities, but Emma was guarded. She answered in short sentences. She didn't laugh at his jokes. And I could see something shift in Marcus's expression as he truly realized, that his actions had consequences. That he had broken something in his relationship with his daughter that would take years to repair, if it could be repaired at all. After that visit, he actually called me. Not to argue, not to fight, but just to talk. He said, "I didn't know. I didn't realize things had gotten that bad." And I believed him because Marcus isn't a bad person. He's a man who made a bad choice, who chose a woman over the safety of his child, who paid a price for that choice that he will continue to pay for years to come. 3 years have passed since I made that phone call. Emma is 10 now, and she's in therapy with a psychologist named Dr. Natalie Thompson, who specializes in childhood trauma. She's learned coping mechanisms. She's learned that what happened to her was not her fault. She's learned that she can tell safe adults when something is wrong. But she still has anxiety. She still sometimes asks me if I'm going to leave her, if I'm going to send her away. She still has bad dreams about spilled juice and angry voices. The trauma lives in her body, in her nervous system, in the way she sometimes flinches when someone raises their voice. Marcus has completed his parenting classes. He's been attending therapy. His visitation has been increased to include some unsupervised time, though he is to maintain a no-contact policy with Jennifer. From what I understand, he and Jennifer broke up about 6 months after the judge issued her ruling, though I don't know all the details, and I don't ask. It's not my business anymore. What matters is that Emma is safe, that she knows she can tell me anything, that she understands that her father's failure to protect her is not her fault and not her responsibility to fix. I've started this YouTube channel, Olive Revenge Stories, because I realized that what happened to me and Emma is not unique. There are thousands of parents out there navigating custody disputes, fighting to protect their children from partners who are dangerous, trying to figure out the right thing to do when the system feels stacked against them. I started this channel because I needed to know that my voice mattered, that my story was worth telling, that maybe by sharing my experience, someone else would find the courage to make that phone call, to report the abuse, to protect their child even when it felt like a betrayal. My mother said that nobody would care about stories like mine, that I was wasting my time. But I believe that these stories matter. I believe that the voice of a mother trying to protect her child matters. I believe that the experience of a child who is brave enough to speak up matters. And if you're listening to this right now, if you've made it all the way through this story, then you're part of proving my mother wrong. You care. You're listening. You're believing. And that means everything. If you're still here, if you want to hear more stories like this one, please subscribe to Olive Revenge Stories. Comment below and tell me, what would you have done in my situation? Would you have made that phone call? How would you have protected your child? Let's create a community where these stories are heard, where these voices matter, where mothers and fathers and children who have been through trauma know that they're not alone. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. Thank you for proving that these stories deserve to be told.